Hi guys, welcome to episode 7 of Books with Jen. If you are listening to this on YouTube and you would prefer to download an audio file of this podcast to take with you out and about on the go, just go to jen-campbell.com/podcast and you can download one there. If you are listening to this on YouTube, also I will link any of the books mentioned in the description box down below. I am delighted to have the rather excellent Deborah Smith on this month's episode of the podcast. Deborah Smith is a translator. She translates from Korean, and among other things, she has translated the work of Han Kang. And you may or may not know that The Vegetarian by Han Kang, which has been doing the rounds on Booktube a lot, recently won the Man Booker International Prize. So I caught up with Deborah to speak to her about what it's like to be a translator, how it all works, and how she became a translator in the first place. And we're going to talk about The Vegetarian and Human X. No spoilers, promise. We're just going to be talking about what goes into creating these works in English. And I really loved chatting with her. We decided to meet out in the sunshine because for once it is sunny in the UK. So there are some background noises, but not much, I promise. There's a bit of a lawnmower for the first couple of minutes in the background, but it disappears. So it's all okay. I hope you guys enjoy this episode of the podcast, and I'll speak to you soon. Hi guys, I am here with Deborah Smith and we are out in the sunshine, which is very nice, though that does mean that we have lots of London sounds around us, including a lawnmower. Do you want to tell them where we are? Because it is very nice here.
Sure, so we're in Rotherhithe, which is pretty much where I live, and we're in this...
Careful, don't stalk her, that's not a very nice thing
that's too general, nobody's going to find me there. And we're in the really nice bit of Rotherhithe, which is not the bit I can afford to live in. We're in, I think it's called St Mary's Churchyard, and the garden has a little cafe, which I always walk past on my way, sort of dashing in a stressed rush to the tube station and see people sitting, having a lovely time.
And that's what we're doing right now, sitting and having a lovely time.
Having a lovely time with the lawnmower.
With a lawnmower. So, Deborah, you are translator extraordinaire. Have you recovered from winning the Man Booker International Prize yet?
Have I recovered?
Yeah.
Yes, I have recovered. It was actually, I think because it happened, everything on the night happened so quickly, and I had no idea what to expect in terms of all the press stuff that they'd arranged for us to do. It was almost as though there was no time for it to sink in, which actually was quite lucky. Otherwise, I might have just sort of run circles around the V&A for hours screaming my head off.
What, you mean they were like, you have won, now you have to go do all the press stuff, go?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, we went on stage, we gave our speeches. I cried quite a lot, but luckily Kang was incredibly cool, as she always is, and she gave her speech first, so I just about managed to pull myself together in time. But then as soon as we were off the stage, it was off being photographed and talking to people and feeling a bit like I was in the Oscars.
Yeah. So, let's step back a bit. How did you get into doing translation work?
Through an incredibly lucky and random series of things happening, which shouldn't give anybody the idea that is what usually happens or a sensible way to go about things.
Okay. What were these series of events?
Well, I guess first of all was deciding that I wanted to be a literary translator, despite having never met such a person. And
like they're an elusive species.
And only knowing English maybe wasn't the most obvious career choice, but I didn't really have any other obvious career choices staring me in the face, so that seemed reasonable enough. And then I was doing a PhD in Korean literature at SOAS, so I'd moved to London to do that. And a couple of lucky things. One was that Han Kang's agent, Barbara Zitwer, had been sending the book around to various publishers, none of whom knew anybody who could read Korean.
Okay.
And so Stefan Tobler from And Other Stories found me online. I subscribed to their books and sent me this book and asked if I would do like a sample and a report for it. Unfortunately, at that time, I'd only been learning the language for 2 years and I'd never actually attempted to read a whole book in Korean before. but had optimistically put in my sort of profile as literary translator from Korean to English, and so was too mortified to explain that this would probably be impossible.
That's amazing. This is actually fake it till you make it, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
In motion.
Fake it and you will possibly make it, but only after you've sort of abjectly failed, which is what I did first of all. I did a sample translation that was so horrible that even Han Kang's wonderful work could not shine through.
So this was for the vegetarian?
Yes. Yeah. But then a year later I was invited to the London Book Fair, because it was the year before Korea was going to be the focus country. And so suddenly all the organisers were rushing around looking for somebody in this country who translates from Korean, and could only find me, who hadn't translated from Korean at that point. And then I was completely not in the sort of industry before then. I'd never even heard of the London Book Fair, but then I got to go along. I got to do a couple of events. I met a bunch of publishers, including Max Porter from Portobello. And because it was the year before Korea's big thing, everybody was asking, do you know of a Korean book that would be right for our lists? And I thought, yes,
I
do. Particularly for Grandeur and Portobello, the vegetarian seemed like it would be a really good fit.
Awesome. So do you think this is really opening up Korean literature for the UK market?
Definitely. I think that for one, there is so much out there because it is so sort of little represented at the moment, and it's a country that has a very lively, diverse literary scene, so there's something for everyone. And I think the big problem, which I kind of didn't even realise was a problem at the beginning, is that a lot of publishers sort of had this idea that, well, how well can a book from South Korea really do?
Like it's an entirely alien place and that people aren't going to understand,
which doesn't make sense to me at all. But there was that idea, and now the vegetarian has proven that, I suppose, that nationality doesn't matter, and there certainly isn't a barrier. I mean, at the same time, it isn't anything to do with what made the vegetarian a success, and it doesn't mean that oh great, South Korean books are going to be really hot now. But I think it's shown at least that taking a risk on an unknown author, a language, country, whatever, that people aren't necessarily familiar with, that's actually what a lot of people appreciate, not just being given another version of something that they've already read like 50 times before.
And I don't think I've ever actually read anything that is like The Vegetarian.
No, exactly. And that's exactly the same, it's as much of an anomaly in some ways in South Korea as it is here. Yeah. But that's always going to be sort of what the best stuff is. It's not the people who are part of a trend, it's the people who are just doing something off
doing their own stuff. Absolutely. So how successful is Han Kang in South Korea?
At the moment, she must be the most successful writer for a very long time. So The Vegetarian was published there in 2007, and I saw an article recently that said in the 9 years since it was published, up until the long list for the Booker was announced, it had sold about 20,000 copies. So it was never a bestseller, but it was a kind of cult book, and it was a steady seller that sort of gained quite a good audience over the years. And so that was around 20,000, and now apparently 426,000.
Oh my god!
And she is currently at, I think this is even more impressive, number 1, 2, and 5 in the bestseller charts.
I saw that on your Twitter earlier. Pretty incredible.
Yeah, and even more incredible given that it could not have happened to a less sort of starry woman who, because you would worry that kind of sudden, ridiculous overnight success could change somebody, could change the way that they write in a lot of instances. And I don't think anybody has anything to worry about where she's concerned. She's taking it all incredibly calmly.
Can we talk about the relationship between a translator and the author of the original work? Because I'm sure that's something that you get asked about a lot and have an answer prepared for, but I think it is something that does fascinate people. When did you first meet Han. Did you speak with her a lot while you were translating Vegetarian? Have you met her before you started doing the second attempt at translation? How did it work?
No, I mean, partly this was because, The Vegetarian was the first translation that I had published, and so I didn't really have any idea about what the normal process was. And
is there a normal process either?
I think it varies a lot, and particularly I think it varies between, whether your author can speak or read a bit of English or not. And in a lot of cases they can't, or if they're dead, that obviously makes it quite different as well. I initially translated The Vegetarian without having spoken to her or had any contact with her, because I didn't know how to get in touch with her. I also didn't know if she spoke English at that stage, although obviously I could have asked her some questions in Korean. But then when I sent the manuscript in,
and this was to Portobello Books?
Yeah, to Portobello, and we went through the edits. They then sent it on to Kang, and she got in touch with me, and yes, revealed that she could read my translation very well. And she had gone through it and mainly just made comments around, explaining a little bit about what her intention had been behind a particular scene or a character or a word choice.
Was that to complement what you were writing, to explain to you further, or to suggest a change, or both?
I don't know, because she was so sort of I don't know if humble is the right word, but she never said, I think you should change this, or
so she was quite free,
is this better? I think just because she recognised that although she could read English quite well, she isn't a native level speaker of it, and so she was trusting me to make the final decision, but wanted to make sure that I guess had as much information as possible. And actually in pretty much every case I did then go back to my translation and rework it in the light of what she had told me. So maybe she had really astutely spotted something that could be different and was just sort of too polite to say, which sounds like something that she would do.
So just in case, for those who haven't yet read The Vegetarian, could you sum up a bit for them?
God.
It's difficult, isn't it?
It's particularly difficult because all the sort of soundbite summaries make it sound very much not what it is. So
no, I think what I had heard before I read it was that, it's about a woman from South Korea who decides to become a vegetarian and her family are really pissed off about it. And that's how people try to summarise it. But I suppose really it's more about the relationship with the body and nature and animalistic intentions of humans. It's a whole host of things. It's a very difficult one to summarise.
Yeah, I mean, the bare bones plot is woman in South Korea decides to become a vegetarian, although actually, I mean, it's not really vegetarianism, and some people have then sort of quibbled about, should it be called the vegan, because actually she doesn't eat eggs or milk or whatever. And well, of course, in the end she is cutting down everything except even water. It's not as though she's following any particular sort of diet plan, or I think sort of the vegetarian is a label that is put on her, and it's about somebody who makes an unexpected decision to take control of their life in a way that is not sort of sanctioned by society or by her family. And she is this sort of acts as this kind of blank slate at the centre of which everybody around her projects their own sort of fears and repressed desires onto her, and are constantly trying to explain to themselves why she's doing what she's doing, and she is sort of eluding these boxes they're trying to put her in.
I suppose that something that's quite fun and an added layer to that is that then that's exactly what the readers do too.
Yeah. Which again is I think possibly why this book has done so well, not just in English, but it had been translated into quite a few languages before the UK edition, really far afield, like Argentina, Vietnam, Poland, and had been very well received in all of them. And I think it's because, or perhaps one of the reasons that makes it's such a good book for that, is that there's a lot of ambiguity and there's a lot about interpretation, and a lot of space for that. The author is always very careful to not sort of tell you what she thinks or what sort of any kind of overarching narrator thinks. Instead, we get a lot about what individual characters think, but then our sort of allegiances change in a way over the course of the book, and so you kind of become aware of yourself as doing that as a reader as well, and you know, can find yourself brought up short sometimes, you know, a sort of a perspective that you've had suddenly maybe turns out to be not as savoury as you might have thought.
Yeah.
That wasn't an awful pun on.
I'll allow it.
Thank you.
So the second book of Han Kang's that's been translated into English is Human Acts. And that, again, it's very, very different, but hops from perspective, again, and looks at the relationship of the body and the soul, and also many other different things. And I loved reading your translator's note at the beginning of the book, where you were talking about the decisions that you make with language, because you said that some of it was written in almost a kind of slang type of Korean, and you couldn't translate that, so you decided to put some of it in a Yorkshire accent. Can you talk us through that? Because I think that's really cool.
Yes. I should say that I only put a very, very tiny bit of it in any kind of Yorkshire, because that actually used to be a thing that people would do when they were translating dialect. It would just be sort of replaced by, you know, suddenly they become Scouse or Geordie or something. But they're exactly, but they're, you know, Korean farmers from sort of 50 years ago, and that just sounds really bizarre. But yeah, Korean dialects are much more like strongly marked than they are in English, even though the sort of South Korea is only the same size as England, so they're almost not mutually intelligible. You have to sort of speak the standard Seoul dialects to make sure that someone from a different region would understand you, or at least until relatively recently. And this whole chapter is written in this incredibly thick dialect from the city of Gwangju, which is where it's set. It's also where Han Kang grew up, and there's a point to that as well. So the whole point of that is it's supposed to be this sort of warmth and this kind of return to, I suppose, the idyll that existed before the massacre. And
because that's what Human Acts is about.
Yes, it is. It is about a historical massacre that occurred in that city in 1980. And there's a section, it's sort of an epilogue / final chapter, where there is a character called the writer who is researching a book, which is what Human Acts turns out to be, and returns from Seoul to Gwangju, which is her hometown, which she hasn't been back to in a very long time. And the people there are speaking this dialect to her, and she finds herself both sort of entranced by that, because to her, the only people she has known growing up who speak like that are her family, and so it's as though she's speaking with her family, as though she's come back home in a way. And at the same time, she is also alienated from that, because she now speaks this really rigid, standard Seoul speech, and as soon as she opens her mouth, the people that she's speaking to sort of become a bit more formal. And so it wasn't as though, you know, the dialect was just there just because that was happened to be where it was set. There was some sort of point of it. So I felt like I had to do something with it that would try and bring that across. And yeah, so there are a few people, you know, addressing other people as love, which is exactly the same thing that I experience when I go back to Doncaster now, and people are talking like that, and I sort of mistakenly try and like get back into it, and then they think I'm foreign and they can't understand what I'm saying because I've gone too far, and it's horribly embarrassing.
I do that too. I feel the need when I go back home, because I used to have, well, not a really strong Geordie accent, because my dad grew up in the south, so I always had a bit of a mix of one, but like a proper one like this, and I'd go so when I go home and I get on a bus and
I guess it's always on the bus.
like, so I'm like, can I have one single to South Shields, please? Like, I have to really put it on, because otherwise they're just going to look at me like, oh, she's not from here. And then I just want to scream, actually, I am. Yeah. But it is that thing, where they're like, yes, pet, or champion. And it's like, oh, yeah, it's those little words, the little affectionate things at the end of sentences that, I don't know, really ground you to that place.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And also, what I love is where they're talking about people walking hunched over, and it is like a Korean character, right? It's imagine a right angle, guys. That's what it looks like. So you've kept that in the book. So you couldn't translate that without keeping that in. What does that character mean in Korean?
It's a K.
A K.
It's because Korean has everything used to be written using sort of Chinese characters, but then in the 20th century they started using their own. Well, they started more widely using their own sort of phonetic alphabet, which is incredibly easy to learn, which is one of the reasons that I chose Korean, not Chinese or Japanese, because you can learn to read it in an afternoon, not several years. But yeah, I mean, I felt, on the one hand, Human Acts compared to The Vegetarian has a lot more of that specific context in it. And also I felt like, because this was the second book, and because The Vegetarian had done quite well, and a lot of people reading Human Acts would already have heard of Han Kang and would have read The Vegetarian, I felt like I had a bit more freedom to not sort of domesticize stuff, which I don't really like doing anyway. You don't want to make things too sort of exotic, but at the same time you don't want to pretend that there is absolutely no difference.
Yeah.
And so things like that, I mean, if there's a way to do it where you don't need to explain something, you don't need to put a footnote in, because that's awful, and makes it sound like a sort of academic textbook, but
it takes the reader out of it as well.
Yeah, and if it's just clear from the context, like, okay, this is that, it's just it's another thing that sort of grounds it in a particular place, which that whole book is very much about. And I think that was something that Kang really felt while she was writing it as well, that it was her sort of love letter to Gwangju in a sense.
And do you notice, well, I'm sure you do, like these little thrills as a translator when something works perhaps even better in English than in the original language, and you get that extra added? Like, I can't help but notice in the book when it's talking about the body and soul, and obviously in Korea there is Seoul the place, and we have that kind of extra thing which you wouldn't have in Korean, which is quite interesting. At the moment you're translating another book of hers.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so this is the most recent book that she's written. In fact, it was only published in South Korea a couple of weeks ago, and it will be called something like The White Book in English. That's the working title for it at the moment. In Korean it's just White. And it's very slim, only about the length of the first third of The Vegetarian, and it's a very experimental work in a lot of ways. It's almost a mix of kind of essay and prose poetry. And yeah, it's actually a good point to mention that Kang is actually a poet as well as a prose writer, which makes her pretty unusual among Korean writers as well, but definitely I think feeds into her prose. And she wrote this book partly while she was in a writer's residency in Warsaw, and so there's a little bit of sort of semi-autobiographical writing about that, but very abstract, and there's also a very personal thread running through it around her own family experiences. And the white theme or idea is continued throughout with sort of these riffs on things that are white. So a shroud, swaddling bands for a baby, fog, the white page before you write on it, and she just goes off on all these sort of wonderful tangents, which then turn out to be all sort of threaded together into a whole, and
I like
it's
stuff like that.
wonderful.
Have you read Bluettes by Maggie Nelson?
Yes.
Is it
And
a bit like
I
that?
thought very
Yeah?
much of that, definitely.
Yeah. So when can we expect that, do you think?
I think at the moment it's scheduled for November next year,
Okay.
which does seem quite a long time to wait.
It'll pass by quickly though.
But yes, I imagine it will. The anticipation will make it all the sweeter. And the new paperback of Human Acts will be coming out, I think, in October. So that will be something to tide people over as well.
Absolutely. So what else are you doing at the moment apart from translating Han Kang's work?
Apart from translating Han Kang's work, I am translating a collection of short stories by another Korean writer called Bae Soo-ah. Han Kang and Bae Soo-ah are my two obsessions. And this will be, I've translated actually two of Soo-ah's novels already, and they're about to come out in the US, and this will then come out sort of even later. And then the other thing that I'm supposed to be doing, certainly more probably than I am actually doing, is that I started a publishing house last year called Tilted Axis, and we are publishing contemporary fiction, mainly in translation, Asian languages, mainly by women, just the kind of stuff that I'm generally interested in anyway, and that there seemed not enough of. Mm-hmm. So I suppose the kind of books that, I'm not, in a sense, I get a bit annoyed sometimes when people think that you're publishing certain things purely from a kind of representational standpoint. Mm-hmm. I'm publishing things that excite me, and that are the kinds of books that wouldn't otherwise make it into English because of the representational stuff, not because of the aesthetic stuff. Just because if you are, a woman writing in Malaysia and don't speak English, then you are just less likely to get an international agent and a publisher and all of these other things than somebody else. And so we've just published our first book, which is called Panti, a Bengali novella by Sangeeta Banjopache, translated by Aranavasena, who is like the one-man superstar of the Bengali translation world. In fact, when I told people that I was starting the press, a lot of people that I met said, "Oh, you should work with Aranava," which turned out to be a very good idea. And that's been really well received so far, which I'm really excited about that. And then, so at the moment we're working on getting the second book ready to go to print, and that is by a young South Korean author called Hwang Jung-eun. And she was recommended to me by Han Kang, actually. She is sort of one of Kang's favourites from the younger generation. And you can see why, in a sense. They both are quite distinct from writers of their generation, the various trends that people are exploring, but also in the way that they have a very strong sort of empathetic focus.
Can you recommend some UK presses for translation stuff? Because obviously there are people like your lovely publishers, and then we have And Other Stories and Pushkin. Who else would you recommend that people pay attention to, as well as your lovely press?
As well as my lovely press, yes. You can read other things as well. That's okay. That's the nicest thing. We are all very uncompetitive, I think, possibly because there's sort of famously no money in it. Yeah. So nobody's squabbling over
like
the
poetry scene, isn't
the
it?
scraps.
Everyone's quite friendly. Yeah. In it together.
Fitzcarraldo are another really exciting press. They're very new. They don't solely do translation, but they do a lot that is less obviously commercial, which is what I tend to like. And they
do a lot of non-fiction translation.
Yes, they sort of do. They have two strands, one which is essay or non-fiction, and the other which is fiction. And I think, in fact, they do translations from both sides. And they just did Secondhand Time by Svetlana Alexievich, who won the Nobel Prize. And that was the sort of book that I kind of felt like I should read. And because, it's Nobel and it's about the USSR, it doesn't feel like it's going to be an enormously exciting book. and it was actually the most gripping page turner that I had read in a very long time, and yet was about sort of people discovering various types of salami and, you know, where they were going to get their vodka from, and I really can't explain it, but it was very exciting.
Well, thank you very much for letting me shove this microphone in your face. You guys can't see it, but it's like I'm a news reporter right now.
It's very exciting. I feel very famous.
People are walking past us like, I don't know what they're doing.
Yep.
Yeah, I think they're jealous.
Yes, thank you for asking me. And it was a lovely excuse to sit in this
in the
courtyard
sun
for so long.
Yeah, we're going to have to get back to our work now. But this was very nice. Okay, I'll speak to you guys later. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this month's episode of Books with Jen. Have you read The Vegetarian? Have you read Human Acts? Are you excited for the White Book like I am? Let me know in the comment section down below if you're watching this on YouTube, or if not, drop me a tweet at Aeroplane Girl, or you can reach me via email at jenvcampbell@gmail.com, especially if you'd like to request possible future guests for episodes of the podcast. I will speak to you guys very soon. I'll be uploading more videos before the next podcast on my YouTube channel if you want to check that out, which is youtube.com/Jen V Campbell. I hope you're all having a great week. I'll speak to you later. Lots of books love. Bye.